Night falls heavily over the stone fortress, but inside, the darkness has already learned to breathe. The iron doors groan as they open, exhaling a draft thick with the memory of every scream that ever touched these walls. You step across the threshold and the world changes. The sound softens first. No wind, no birds, only the slow drip of water sliding down ancient stone. Then comes the smell, metallic and cold, like rust clinging to old blood. Even before you see anything, you feel it. A place built not for justice, but for mastery over the human spirit. Most people imagine torture as chaos, but here everything was deliberate. Every echo, every chain, every torch fixed to the wall served a purpose. Power, confession, fear. These rooms were engineered to make a person surrender before a single tool was lifted. The psychological weight did half the work. The rest was done by men trained to read the human threshold for suffering like scholars reading scripture. As your eyes adjust, shapes begin to reveal themselves, shadows shaped like devices, devices shaped like nightmares. Nothing here is accidental. The Middle Ages understood something brutal. If you control the body, you control the truth. And kings, inquisitors, and city magistrates needed truth more than mercy. That is why these chambers existed behind iron doors instead of open courts. The spectacle was too raw, the cost too revealing. Pain became an intimate negotiation between the accused and the authority that claimed to speak for God or crown. But these rooms were never just about extracting confessions. They were theaters of fear. Word of what happened inside them traveled faster than armies. A whisper from someone who survived, a rumor from someone who didn't. Stories grew like mold, darkening taverns, markets, and quiet homes. And that was the point. A ruler didn't need to torture thousands. He only needed the world to believe he would. In the silence, you hear a muffled strain, maybe imagination, maybe history repeating through stone. The torches flicker like trembling memories, casting long streaks of amber across instruments built to stretch, twist, crush, and silence. You realize these rooms were more than chambers. They were architecture shaped by fear, designed with calculations as precise as any cathedral. One uplifted, the other destroyed, yet both claim the soul. What haunts most is the realization that the men who ran these chambers didn't always see themselves as monsters. Many believed they were safeguarding order, protecting divine law, or defending fragile kingdoms from chaos. And that moral contradiction, the belief that cruelty could be righteous, was the most dangerous tool of all. It meant the iron doors didn't just hide brutality, they justified it. You walk deeper, footsteps swallowed by the damp floor, sensing the ghosts of those who entered without ever stepping back into daylight. Their stories are scattered across Europe, hidden under castles, monasteries, and city halls. These rooms hold secrets that were never meant to be told, yet they shape societies in ways we still feel today. They redefined fear, obedience, and the very meaning of truth. Tonight, those secrets open with the doors. Ahead lies a journey through 12 real torture chambers where stone became witness and pain became policy. And as the darkness thickens, one unsettling truth rises. The iron doors may be ancient, but the shadows they cast still reach into the modern world. Step carefully as you move forward, for what waits beyond is not just history, but a mirror to the darker instincts of humanity, a reflection that sharpens with each chamber and challenges what you believe authority protects. Behind every iron door and dripping stone corridor, there was a reason. These rooms did not exist merely to punish. They were palaces of power, carefully constructed to uphold hierarchies that might crumble under the weight of defiance. Kings, bishops, and magistrates understood a simple truth. Fear commands obedience more effectively than law or reason ever could. Within these walls, authority became tangible, a physical presence pressing against flesh and mind, reminding everyone that rebellion had a cost measured not in coins or land, but in agony. The political landscape of medieval Europe was a fragile lattice of loyalty and intimidation. A kingdom was only as stable as its subjects' willingness to obey, and doubt was a disease that could spread faster than any army. Torture rooms, then, were strategic instruments. They were not chaotic prisons, they were laboratories of control. Every chain, pulley, and iron spike was a calculated component in a system designed to extract not just confessions, but compliance. A single display of suffering could silence a village. A single whispered legend of pain could prevent a revolt. In these chambers, authority was not abstract, it was visible, visceral, unavoidable. Religion magnified this force. The Inquisition, in particular, transformed fear into a divine weapon. Heresy was not merely a crime against the crown, it was a sin against God. The Church required obedience, and the human body became the conduit for absolution and confession. Torture was not cruelty without purpose, it was ritual. Every stretch, every burn, every turn of the wheel was framed as necessary for salvation. The paradox is chilling. Victims were told that enduring agony could cleanse their soul, that suffering itself was a passage to righteousness. And the inquisitors believed it. Conviction and cruelty intertwined, producing a system that was terrifyingly efficient. Social hierarchies further reinforced the need for these rooms. Peasants, merchants, and nobles alike learned that disobedience carried consequences beyond fines or exile. The psychological imprint of torture was more potent than any edict. Those who witnessed the aftermath, or even heard rumors of what occurred behind thick walls, internalized fear as a personal law. Compliance became instinctive, obedience became habit, and terror became a currency more valuable than gold. Medieval rulers understood this. One properly terrorized individual could influence dozens of others without the ruler ever showing himself. Yet, these chambers were not merely functional, they were performative. Every design choice, from the height of a ceiling to the angle of a rack, reinforced dominance. Victims entered knowing the architecture was complicit in their suffering. Chains were positioned to maximize strain, rooms to amplify sound, and walls to echo despair into every corner. Torture was theater, and the actors were those whose voices had been stolen. The audience was the kingdom itself, learning submission in the most intimate, horrifying way imaginable. Ultimately, the palaces of pain reveal a civilization that understood the terrifying power of control. They were not accidental, nor were they barbaric by negligence. They were calculated, deliberate, psychological, and political. Fear became infrastructure, cruelty became law, suffering became both shield and sword of authority. The very existence of these chambers proved that human agony could be engineered, organized, and weaponized. And as we step closer to the tools themselves, the line between punishment and performance blurs, leaving only the undeniable truth. The medieval world built empires as much on terror as on treaties, and within these stone walls, fear was absolute. The moment you cross the threshold into the chambers themselves, the air thickens. It carries a weight that no stone could naturally bear, a scent of rust, sweat, and fear that clings to the skin and refuses to leave. The walls close in, low ceilings pressing like silent witnesses. Every surface, every beam, every iron hook tells a story of meticulous design. These rooms were not simply storage for instruments of pain. They were extensions of the devices themselves, constructed to enhance terror and prolong agony. At the center of the first chamber lies the rack, its polished wooden frame gleaming under torchlight. To the untrained eye, it is a piece of furniture almost elegant in its simplicity. But its function is diabolical. Leather straps and iron chains connect limbs to rollers that stretch the body beyond natural limits. Joints scream in protest, ligaments strain, and the spine curves in impossible arcs. The room itself amplifies the torture. The narrow stone walls echo the cries, feeding them back like a chorus of torment. Architects designed these chambers with precision. Every sound, every creak of the mechanism, every shadow cast by the swinging chains was calculated to unnerve not only the victim, but anyone who might glimpse the act. Next comes the strappado hall, a long, dim corridor where ropes hang from ceiling beams. The victim is hoisted by the wrists, arms bound behind the back and suspended above the ground. Bones threaten to snap under their own weight. Shoulders tear as gravity becomes an unyielding accomplice. Sound is trapped here too, the stone reverberates, and each thump of a body hitting the floor or chains rattling resonates like a hammer against the soul. The hall was narrow by design. Walls pressed in, forcing the mind to focus on its own helplessness, leaving no escape from the horror above. In the stretching pits, the floor drops into a shallow trench. Water pooled at the base, cold and uninviting. Victims were tied to iron stakes and stretched to extremes, sometimes partially submerged. Their bodies became instruments themselves, pulsing with the slow, methodical application of pain. The architecture of the pit enhanced vulnerability. Low ceilings prevented lifting or dodging. Walls angled inward to limit movement, every sound trapped in a tight echo chamber. These pits were as much psychological as physical. They communicated through environment alone that resistance was futile. Deprivation cells offered a different kind of cruelty. Small, dark, windowless rooms where light rarely penetrated and food or water was withheld, they turned simple isolation into an instrument of suffering. Hunger gnawed at flesh. Silence gnawed at reason. Low ceilings pressed on the shoulders. Stone floors bit through thin clothing. The deprivation cell was a weapon of time. Days became weeks, weeks became months, and the mind itself began to fracture. Shadows stretched unnaturally, and the mind conjured threats more vivid than any device. Here, the architecture itself conspired with the punishment. The cell was a trap of perception, making the occupant a prisoner of fear even when alone. Each device and room worked in concert, a symphony of calculated terror. Chains, beams, hooks, and water, nothing was incidental. The builders understood that pain could be amplified by confinement, echo, and anticipation. The rack might break bones, but the narrow corridor would crush spirit first. The strappado might twist joints, but the ceiling's low height would twist hope. Every chamber told a story, not just of suffering, but of human ingenuity turned toward cruelty. And yet, what is perhaps most haunting is the intimacy of these instruments. They were designed not merely to injure, but to communicate dominance, to map the limits of flesh and mind, to make the human body a message written in agony. The devices themselves were darkly beautiful in their precision, each curve, each pulley, each hook, engineered to extract more than pain, to extract obedience, confession, terror. As you move from chamber to chamber, the narrative of architecture and tool merges. Stone walls are no longer passive observers, they are participants. Iron hooks hang like silent sentinels. Water glistens in pits like liquid mirrors of despair. And in this convergence of design and cruelty, the medieval mind's obsession with control is made horrifyingly tangible. The tools of darkness do not merely shape bodies, they shape fear itself, leaving a trail that whispers into every corridor you have yet to enter. Beyond the clatter of chains and the snap of bones lies a different kind of terror, one that leaves no visible mark yet carves deeply into the soul. These are the rooms built not to wound the body, but to dissolve the self. Medieval interrogators understood with unnerving clarity that flesh is easier to repair than psyche. In chambers of silence and shadow, they practiced a craft of slow annihilation, exploiting the mind's fragility in ways that predate any modern study of psychology. Solitude vaults were among the most insidious. Small, windowless cells designed for a single occupant, they stripped away every anchor to the outside world. Days, sometimes weeks, passed with only the echo of one's own breath as company. Food and water were sparse, carefully rationed to weaken the body, but the mind suffered far more. Time blurred, memories dissolved, victims reported hearing voices that were not there, shadows that moved with intent, a creeping sense that the self was slipping through invisible fingers. The vault was a laboratory of perception, and the victim its unwilling subject. Darkness dungeons intensified this mental assault. Entire halls were shrouded in permanent night, torches banned, and any flicker of light denied. Eyes strained uselessly against impenetrable black. The simplest actions, moving, breathing, hearing, became disorienting exercises in horror. Walls seemed to close, floors tilted, ceilings pressed down, all imagined by the brain struggling to reconcile what the eyes could not see. Hours became years, minutes became lifetimes. Torturers discovered that the brain, deprived of reference and stimulus, could invent terrors more potent than iron or fire. Madness did not come slowly, it arrived as a storm, leaving behind a mind unrecognizable even to itself. Echo chambers were another layer of psychological engineering. Narrow corridors and vaulted rooms were constructed to trap sound, amplifying whispers into screams and whispers into cacophony. A single confession, a muttered plea, or a scream could ricochet endlessly, making it impossible to tell if others were present, dead, or imagined. Victims reported hearing their own screams repeated back at them, each echo distorted, growing stranger and more menacing with every repetition. The architecture became complicit in cruelty, turning perception into punishment. Space itself became an instrument of fear, and the mind its malleable canvas. Then there were the oubliettes, the cold stone dungeons sunk deep beneath fortress floors. These were pits of darkness where prisoners were left for weeks, sometimes months, with barely enough room to sit, no light, and water seeping cold through the stones. Isolation here was total. The body starved, the skin chilled, but it was the mind that suffered the most. Without the ability to track time, without contact, the concept of self frayed. Individuals ceased to exist in any coherent sense. Sleep became fragmented. Nightmares bled into waking hours, and reason itself began to fracture. Medieval interrogators had learned that by denying light, sound, and social contact, they could reshape a human being into a vessel of submission. What links all these chambers is a terrifying efficiency. Physical torture could be observed, measured, and countered with treatment. Psychological torture, however, left no visible scars, only permanent fractures in identity, perception, and willpower. These rooms were instruments of invisibility. They took what could not be seen and made it unbearable, slowly eroding resistance, replacing courage with uncertainty, memory with confusion. The medieval mind had discovered that the greatest cruelty is not in pain alone, but in the absence of certainty, companionship, and control. And as we leave these shadowed halls behind, one fact becomes chillingly clear. The architecture of madness is precise. Every stone, beam, and corridor was positioned to stretch perception, compress time, and dismantle the mind. These were not chaotic prisons, they were meticulously designed arenas of mental annihilation, a proof that human ingenuity can be turned toward the most intimate, terrifying domination imaginable. In the quiet of these rooms, sanity itself was the first casualty, and fear became the language through which power spoke. The path ahead will reveal how this philosophy of control extended even further, into chambers where suffering became spectacle and horror was codified into ritual. Some doors were never meant to open again. Beyond them lay chambers where the end was not negotiation but certainty, where human life was measured not in breaths but in moments of orchestrated horror. Execution chambers were the final act in a symphony of suffering, designed to leave no escape, no hope, no witness untouched by dread. These were spaces where architecture, ritual, and cruelty merged, transforming death into spectacle, pain into narrative, and fear into doctrine. Burning galleries were narrow halls, lined with hooks and iron chains, designed to suspend victims above slow fires. Flames licked the edges of wooden beams, smoke curling around stone walls to suffocate and disorient. The victims' cries merged with the hiss of water and the crackle of fire, a macabre chorus that filled the chamber. Witnesses outside may have seen only flickering shadows, yet the lesson was absolute. Defiance would be consumed. The fire did more than kill, it demonstrated control over both flesh and spirit, a warning carried back to every village, monastery, and market. Boiling pits were deeper, darker, and far more deliberate. Metal cauldrons filled with scalding liquids awaited those accused of crimes deemed most grievous. Victims were lowered slowly, the body arching against restraint, skin blistering as water, oil, or blood-polluted substances rose to meet them. Every movement, every shiver of agony, was magnified by stone walls that trapped sound and heat, amplifying suffering beyond the immediate victim. These pits were ritualistic as well as punitive. Boiling was a language of fear, its lesson understood by the living as much as by the dead. Spike-lined execution vaults were perhaps the most visually grotesque. Floors studded with iron points, ceilings hung with chains and hooks, walls rigged to pin and impale. Anyone entering these vaults became part of an architectural equation of death. Each spike, each hook, each heavy beam was calculated to maximize not just injury but terror. The vaults were chambers of anticipation. The mind confronted the inevitability of annihilation long before the body did. Execution was never instantaneous, it was an immersive lesson in absolute power, an unflinching display of control over both life and perception. Death in these rooms was always public, though not always in the sense of spectacle as we might imagine. The audience was often absent, yet the architecture ensured that no witness could escape the lesson. Walls amplified screams, corridors transmitted echoes, and the design ensured that rumor alone would carry the horror further than the flesh could survive. Each execution was both punishment and performance, each chamber a theater in which suffering was choreographed with meticulous precision. Perhaps the darkest aspect is the symbolism embedded in every choice. Fire, water, spikes, each medium carried meaning beyond the mere physical. Fire purged, water punished, spikes humiliated. The act of killing became a narrative, a moral lesson, and a reminder that authority wielded death as both tool and message. Torture had reached its final stage, where confession, resistance, and survival were irrelevant. Only obedience or its absence mattered, and the absence was recorded in flames, blood, and shattered bodies. These rooms forced confrontation with a truth medieval society understood, but modern eyes often shy from. Execution was never simple. It was architecture and ritual, philosophy and power, engineering and spectacle. Every stone, every beam, every heated pit or hooked wall was designed to speak, to command, and to haunt. Those who entered knew what awaited. Those who survived remembered, and those who died became living warnings etched into memory. In these chambers, suffering met its apex, and as the final echoes fade, the journey leads toward a quieter, yet no less chilling revelation. The legacy of these rooms persists, reverberating into modern spaces of control, coercion, and fear, a testament to humanity's capacity for both order and unimaginable cruelty. Step out of the stone corridors, out of the echoing chains, and into the world we call familiar. The iron doors close behind you, but the lessons linger. The screams that once bounced off dungeon walls have not vanished. They have changed shape. Modern prisons, interrogation rooms, and psychological pressure chambers carry the same blueprint, the same intent, dressed in fluorescent lights and concrete rather than torchlight and stone. Humanity swaps spikes for steel tables, chains for handcuffs, and fire for fluorescent scrutiny, yet the purpose remains: to bend, break, and extract control from another human being. Consider solitary confinement, a direct descendant of the oubliette and the darkness dungeon. Hours, days, weeks behind steel doors, sensory deprivation, silence, and isolation. Psychologists today describe its effects in clinical terms. But centuries ago, medieval torturers discovered the same truths without theory. The mind unravels when stripped of companionship, light, and certainty. Fear, anticipation, and the slow erosion of identity remain as effective now as they were under vaulted ceilings and iron hooks. The human psyche has not evolved to resist the architecture of terror. It has simply been challenged by subtler, more bureaucratic forms. Interrogation methods have grown more sophisticated, yet echoes of the rack, strappado, and boiling pit persist. Modern coercion often relies on intimidation, sleep deprivation, and manipulation, psychological levers that force compliance without leaving visible scars. The lesson is identical. Suffering is less about violence itself and more about establishing absolute dominance over the mind and spirit. History's cruelest techniques have been distilled, codified, and sanitized, proving that ingenuity and cruelty is not limited to the past. It is a continuum, a dark thread weaving through centuries of human governance. Even in everyday systems, the remnants are there. Bureaucracy, surveillance, and social pressures replicate the same principles: authority, observation, and the threat of exposure. Fear remains a tool of control, sometimes invisible, sometimes institutionalized. Medieval torturers built chambers of stone and iron. Modern societies build systems of restraint and obligation. Both teach obedience through apprehension, both exploit vulnerability, both leave an imprint far beyond the moment of compliance. In essence, the rooms themselves have transformed, but the impulse that created them endures. The moral weight of this realization is heavy. Walking through the dungeons of history, it is impossible not to see reflection in the present. The same drive that engineered chains and pits now powers interrogation policies, high security confinement, and psychological manipulation. The difference is one of visibility and law, not of intent. Fear, control, and calculated suffering have simply donned new masks, making it easier for society to rationalize what would once have been called barbarism. The shadows of medieval cruelty are alive today, hidden behind doors of bureaucracy, cement, and glass. Yet understanding these echoes is more than grim fascination, it is a warning. The iron doors may be gone, but the lessons remain. We must recognize the impulses that built them, the human capacity for cruelty disguised as order, and the seductive efficiency of fear as a tool. To witness the past is to see the potential for repetition. It asks of us vigilance, reflection, and moral courage, reminding us that systems endure longer than memories, and the quiet acceptance of control can become the softest chains. As the final torch flickers in your mind, the image of the medieval chambers lingers, merging with the sterile modern walls. The echoes are unmistakable. History's darkest rooms survive not in stone, but in the intentions we justify today. And when you leave this place, the choice is yours. To repeat, to ignore, or to confront the shadows that stretch from iron doors to modern steel. Listen closely, some doors never truly close, and some lessons demand we remember long after the last echo fades.